Welcome to the CDA Institute's Geopolitical Update. I'm Josh Malm, Director of Research and Analysis for the Institute, and I'm joined by geopolitical expert Joseph Varner, Deputy Director of the Conference of Defense Associations and former Director of Policy for the Minister of National Defense.
Well, Joe, thanks for joining us once again for another geopolitical update. So this week, as our listeners might know, marks the one-year anniversary of the devastating October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel, an event that not only ignited the current Israel-Hamas war, but also opened up a new phase in Israel's broader regional conflict with Iran. So in this episode of the update, we're going to look back on the incursion that led to Israel's military response, its ongoing battle with Iranian proxies across Gaza, Lebanon, and Syria. While Israel has secured tactical victories against groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, the strategic picture remains fraught. And despite these gains, Iran continues to escalate the conflict, which has raised fears of nuclear brinkmanship. So today, Joe is going to look back at the events that unfolded with us. He's going to analyze some of the shifting dynamics in the region a year on and explore what the conflict means for Israel in the Middle East a year later. So, Joe, thanks again for joining us as always. I'm going to let you do your thing and provide the analysis that our listeners want to hear.
Thanks, Josh. So, as Josh has said, we've just passed the 1 year mark of the sad anniversary of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad's brutal surprise October 7th attacks on Israel that have triggered a growing regional war in the Middle East between Israel and Iran and its proxies. Israel is still engaged in counterinsurgency and urban warfare against the remnants of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in the Gaza Strip. The Palestinian terrorist groups are now shadows of their former selves, with most of their military political leadership missing or dead. They appear still capable of localized attacks and are attempting to reconstitute themselves, but are in a very weakened state. And Hamas and its remaining leadership are still clinging to their maximalist demands that Israel withdraw completely from the Gaza Strip, leave Hamas as its government, and agree to a long-term ceasefire. And some 101 Israeli hostages are still in the hands of the terrorists and hang in the balance. Terrorist forces in the West Bank continue to try and mount attacks on Israel proper, but they've had mixed success. Iran has attempted to foment trouble in Jordan to further surround Israel with enemies. And Iran's ring of fire strategy continues to play out against Israel throughout the Middle East region, with attacks on Israel from its proxy militias in Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Iraq, and Iran itself. And Israel has engaged Hezbollah forces in southern Lebanon in heavy fighting after weeks of preparatory attacks. And with the war in the north, some 100,000 Israelis from northern communities remain displaced, and they've essentially been out of their homes since October 7th. Hezbollah has seen much of its military and political leadership eliminated, and a good portion of its weapon stocks of rockets and missiles have been destroyed by Israeli strikes. Local commanders of Hezbollah units continue to wage war against Israel, but the terrorist group has taken a mauling at the hands of the Israeli Defense Forces and are trying to reconstitute their military leadership, keeping in mind that they are a tool of Iran. And Iranian attempts to resupply Hezbollah through Syria have come under Israeli attack and precision targeted strikes on Iranian-backed forces in that country, and they've been very effective. Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen continue to attack shipping in the Red and Arabian Seas and to launch long-range weapons at Israeli civilian targets with limited success. The US and UK have carried out preemptive or preventative strikes on Houthi weapon systems that they see deployed and ready to go, while Israel has gone after the group's, the Houthis' controlled port and their oil facilities in retaliatory attacks, and to a certain extent their power infrastructure. Iranian-backed forces in Iraq continue to claim to launch attacks on Israel, but in reality are launching missiles at U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria with limited effect again. Iran continues to press the Iraqi government to force U.S. forces based in the country to just pack up and leave. And Iran itself, breaking from its traditional military doctrine of using proxy militias to attack Israel, has launched two direct and massive missile attacks on the Jewish state. The first attack came in April with 100 or 300 or so ballistic cruise missiles and drones launched at Israel with little effect. The second attack came in the last 10 days with 181 ballistic missiles fired at Israel, some of which seem to have penetrated Israeli air defenses. And Tehran is now waiting for the Israeli retaliatory response, said to be severe. Iran has threatened its neighbors that whoever assists Israel will be next in its attacks. And they've been singling out the Saudis in particular, telling them not to let the Israelis use their airspace. From a tactical point of view, in what is becoming a regional war, Israel has done well on the battlefields of Gaza, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen in its air campaign. Israel's cyber attack on Hezbollah was a huge success, and its counterinsurgency operations against Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Hezbollah, nothing short of brilliant. But at the strategic level, a winning Israeli strategy to deal with the so-called forces of resistance and Iran, its center of gravity, have been lacking to date. Israel, the most formidable military power in the Middle East and a nuclear weapon state, has failed to deter Iran from attacks on Israel through its ring of fire of proxy militias or direct attacks by Tehran with ballistic missiles. Time will tell whether Israel's retaliatory strike, when it comes, will finally set the grounds for deterrence and force the Iranians to back down and set the stage for a ceasefire or ceasefires in the region. If Israel can't settle accounts with Tehran and deter the Islamic Republic, how far this conflict spreads is anyone's guess. But Israeli support among its closest and traditional allies in the West has been shaky at best and remains a major strategic concern, as does Iran's march to becoming a nuclear weapon state, if it is not one already. And by April of next year, experts believe Iran could have as many as 10 nuclear weapons. The Israeli strategy, given Iran's last missile attack on the Jewish state, its penetration of Israeli defenses, and the failure of deterrence, is ultimately going to have to hinge upon how to prevent the next Iranian missile salvo from being nuclear tipped, and how does Tel Aviv defang Tehran before a potential nuclear exchange. And that's what the Middle East is looking at right now.
Well, Joe, that was a really comprehensive, but also fairly quick overview of the entire situation over the past year. So, Joe, thanks for joining us again. And as always, thanks for sharing your insights. We've looked back at the events of the past year. We examined the ongoing conflict, and you've also considered a little bit what the future might hold for the region. So, to our listeners, as the situation continues to evolve, we'll keep following these developments closely. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Geopolitical Update. And for our Canadian audience, wishing you a happy Thanksgiving.